The oil on my windscreen was still warm. I could smell it mixing with hydraulic fluid, burnt metal, and my own blood, a combination I'd never forget if I lived another 50 years. Which, at 23,000 feet over northern France, with a dying aircraft, and a German fighter lining up behind me for another pass, seemed unlikely. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started, because understanding how I ended up trapped in a shattered Thunderbolt with a Focke-Wulf pilot, apparently determined to personally deliver me to hell, requires understanding what brought a farm boy from Lawton, Oklahoma, into the biggest air war the world had ever seen. My daddy raised horses, good ones, quarter horses mostly, the kind that could turn on a dime and work cattle from sunup to sundown. I grew up understanding that weight wasn't always a disadvantage, that power mattered, and that the best animals were the ones built to take punishment and keep going. I didn't know it then, but those lessons from the Oklahoma dust were preparing me for the 7-ton fighter plane that would save my life. I'd never even seen an airplane up close until 1941. Sure, I'd watched them pass overhead sometimes, little silver crosses crawling across that big prairie sky, but they might as well have been on the moon for all they had to do with my life. Then Pearl Harbor happened, and suddenly every boy in America wanted wings. The recruiter in Oklahoma City looked at my application like I'd asked to sprout feathers. Farm work isn't exactly prime preparation for fighter pilot school, son. Sir, I said, I can handle machinery, work under pressure, and I don't quit when things get difficult. Figured the Army could teach me the rest. He must have seen something in my stubborn Oklahoma face, because 3 months later I was at flight school, discovering that I had hands that could feel what an airplane was doing before my brain knew it. The instructors called it natural ability. I called it the same thing I'd had with horses. An understanding that you were partnering with something powerful that could kill you if you didn't respect it. By September 1942, I was assigned to the 56th Fighter Group at Bridgeport, Connecticut, transitioning to the P-47 Thunderbolt. And that's where I first met the airplane that would become my life, my terror, and ultimately my salvation. Sweet Jesus, it was huge. I stood on the tarmac at Bridgeport with the other replacement pilots, staring at the Republic P-47C in front of us like it was some kind of mechanical joke. The damn thing looked pregnant. A barrel-shaped fuselage topped with a greenhouse canopy that made you feel like you were sitting in a fishbowl. The cowling was massive, housing that enormous Pratt & Whitney radial engine, and the propeller. Lord, that propeller looked like it belonged on a ship, not an airplane. That's what we're supposed to fly? The pilot next to me, a kid from Boston named McGraw, sounded like someone had just told him he'd be riding a bull into combat. Our instructor, a major named Zeke, who'd been flying since before some of us were born, just smiled that knowing smile. Gentlemen, meet your new girlfriend. She's heavy, she's temperamental, and she'll kill you if you don't treat her right. But if you learn to dance with her, she'll bring you home when everything else has failed. He was right on all counts. The first time I tried to take off in a P-47, I nearly killed myself. That massive engine produced so much torque that the whole aircraft wanted to roll left the moment you pushed the throttle forward. I'd been warned, I'd been trained, but knowing something intellectually and experiencing 900 horses trying to flip your aircraft onto its back are two very different things. I fought the controls, overcorrected, felt the tail come up too fast, saw the prop tips getting closer to the runway than they should, and somehow, more instinct than skill, wrestled the beast into the air. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it over the engine roar. Johnson, your takeoff looked like a drunk man trying to thread a needle, Zeke told me after I'd somehow managed to land without killing myself. But you kept it together when it went wrong. That's what counts. Over the next 4 months, 18 pilots from our group didn't keep it together. Some ground looped on landing, the P-47 swapping ends and crumpling like tin foil. Some torque rolled on takeoff and augured in before they climbed 100 feet. Some discovered compressibility in dives, that terrifying moment when you're going so fast that the controls stop responding and you're just along for the ride into the ground. McGraw from Boston was one of them, spun in during a training flight in November. They found pieces of his P-47 scattered across a Connecticut farm field. His body was still strapped in what was left of the cockpit. That night, lying in my bunk, I seriously considered washing out. The P-47 had killed more Americans than Germans at that point, and I wasn't sure I wanted to bet my life on a machine that seemed determined to murder its own pilots. But something kept me there. Maybe it was Oklahoma stubbornness. Maybe it was remembering my daddy telling me that the best horses were the ones that tested you first. Maybe it was the memory of listening to the radio in December 1941, hearing about the Arizona burning in Pearl Harbor, and knowing that someone had to make them pay for it. So I kept flying. And slowly, grudgingly, the P-47. And I came to an understanding. By the time we shipped out to England in January 1943, I had about 100 hours in the Thunderbolt. I could take off without trying to cartwheel across the runway. I could land without ground looping. I could handle the aircraft in basic maneuvers. But I didn't love it, and I sure as hell didn't trust it. England was cold, wet and grey, pretty much what you'd expect from a place where the sun seemed to consider showing up an optional activity. Our base at Horsham St Faith was a collection of Quonset huts, muddy fields and hard stands, where our P-47s sat like fat metal ducks, waiting for whatever the Luftwaffe wanted to throw at us. The British pilots at the neighbouring RAF base were polite about our aircraft, in that way the British have of insulting you while maintaining perfect manners. "Lovely kite you've got there," one Spitfire pilot told me at the pub one night. "Rather large, isn't she?" Suppose she's quite stable, what with all that mass. Translation: your airplane is a pig, and we're amazed you can get it off the ground. They weren't entirely wrong. Our first combat missions in April 1943 were escort duty for B-17 formations hitting targets in occupied France. The procedure was simple in theory: climb to altitude, meet the bombers, stick with them, and shoot down any German fighters that got too close. In practice, it was like trying to dance while wearing lead boots. The German pilots, veterans of Poland, France, Britain and Russia, flew circles around us, literally. Their Focke-Wulf 19s and Messerschmitt 19s could outturn us, outclimb us at medium altitude, and outmaneuver us in every conventional engagement. They'd come in from below where we were sluggish, force us into turning fights where agility mattered more than firepower, and disappear before we could get our guns on target. I fired my weapons in anger for the first time on April 15th, 1943. A Messerschmitt 109 flashed in front of me at maybe 400 yards, a quick deflection shot that probably had zero chance of hitting. I pressed the trigger on my control stick and felt the Thunderbolt shudder as all 8.50 caliber machine guns opened up. The sound was unbelievable, not like anything I'd experienced in training, a deep, hammering thunder that vibrated through the entire aircraft. I could see my tracer rounds reaching out, a stream of fire that seemed solid, like I was wielding a fire hose instead of bullets. I missed. The 109 jinked and dove, disappearing into the clouds below. But in that moment, I understood something. The British were wrong. The Germans were wrong. This wasn't about turning and climbing. This was about something else entirely. The pilot who really taught me how to fly the P-47 was Major Hubert Zemke, our group commander. Hub was a hard man, all angles and intensity, with eyes that looked like they could bore holes through steel. But he understood the Thunderbolt in a way the rest of us were still learning. "Stop trying to dogfight," he told us in a briefing in May. "Stop trying to turn with them. Stop trying to climb with them at their altitudes. That's not what this airplane does." "Then what the hell does it do, sir?" someone asked. Hub smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. It kills them from above. It dives faster than anything the Germans have. It hits harder than anything in the sky. And it takes punishment that would turn a Messerschmitt into confetti. Use your weight, use your power, use your guns. Everything else is just noise. He was right. But understanding that intellectually and executing it in combat were different things. The Germans weren't cooperating with our new tactics. They kept attacking from below, forcing us into exactly the kind of fight we couldn't win. I got my first kill on May 29th, 1943. A Focke-Wulf 190 made the mistake of pulling up in front of me after a pass at the bombers, probably thinking he had time to reset before the fat American could react. He didn't understand what a P-47 could do in a dive. I rolled inverted and pulled through, the Thunderbolt accelerating like it had been kicked by God. The airspeed indicator wound up, 300 miles per hour, 350, 400, faster than I'd ever flown in my life. The controls got heavy, the aircraft shaking, but responsive. Below me, the Focke-Wulf was still climbing, completely unaware. I pulled out of the dive maybe 300 yards behind him, lined up my shot, and pressed the trigger. The 8 guns spoke with that distinctive thunder, and I watched, almost in slow motion, as my rounds walked into the German fighter. Pieces flew off, smoke erupted, the canopy flew off, and a shape tumbled out. The pilot, his chute opening just seconds before I flashed past. I was shaking when I landed, not from fear, from adrenaline, from the realization that I'd just killed a man, from understanding that this was real, and it was only going to get more real. Good kill, Hub told me in the debriefing. Clean, efficient. That's how it's done. That night, alone in my quarters, I threw up. Then I wrote a letter to my parents telling them nothing about what had really happened, and tried to sleep. By June 1943, I'd flown 27 combat missions and scored 2 confirmed kills. I'd also learned that surviving in a P-47 required thinking about combat differently than everything we'd been taught. This wasn't the chivalrous, one-on-one dogfighting that the Romantics talked about. This was industrial warfare in 3 dimensions. Use your advantages, exploit their weaknesses, bring overwhelming firepower to bear, and get out before they could respond. The Germans were learning to hate us. We could hear it in their radio chatter, which our intelligence guys monitored. They called us Jabos, fighter bombers, even when we weren't carrying bombs. They called our guns Roosevelt's piano because of the distinctive hammering sound. The mockery of April had turned to frustration by June. But frustration makes people dangerous. Angry pilots take risks, press attacks harder, come back for a second pass when they should disengage. And that's what nearly killed me. June 26, 1943, started like any other mission day. Woke up at 0430 to the sound of someone banging on the Quonset hut door. Cold wash from a basin using water that barely qualified as liquid. Breakfast was powdered eggs that tasted like cardboard, mixed with regret. Toast that could double as body armor, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. The briefing was routine. Escort B-17s hitting industrial targets around Le Bourget, France. We'd climb to 27,000 feet, meet the bombers, and stick with them through the target area and partway back. Fighter opposition expected, when wasn't it? Probably Focke-Wulf 190s from JG-26, one of their best units. I'd been assigned to fly tail end Charlie in the second flight, the worst position in the formation, the spot where the stragglers and new guys usually got put. But I wasn't a new guy anymore. I had 27 missions and 2 kills. Maybe they just needed someone reliable in the vulnerable spot. Johnson, keep your eyes open back there. My flight leader, Captain Walker, told me before we mounted up. Germans like to come in from behind and below. They see a straggler, they'll bounce him hard. Yes, sir, I said, pulling on my leather flying jacket and grabbing my gear. The oxygen mask, the helmet, the gloves, the Mae West life preserver, all the equipment that might keep you alive if everything went to hell. My P-47, number 42-8487, was waiting on the hardstand. My crew chief, a tough little Italian guy from Brooklyn named Moretti, had her ready to go. "She's good today, Lieutenant," Moretti said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Changed the oil, checked every cable, loaded your guns fresh. 850s with 425 rounds each. You got 3,400 reasons to come home." "Thanks, Chief," I said, doing my pre-flight walk around. Everything looked solid. No fluid leaks, control surfaces free, prop undamaged, tires good. The P-47 looked almost friendly sitting there in the weak English sunlight, that big radial engine waiting to roar to life. I climbed into the cockpit, a process that required some gymnastics given how high off the ground the thing sat. Settled into the seat, strapped in, shoulder harness, lap belt, all snug. The cockpit smelled like oil, hydraulic fluid, and that peculiar mix of rubber and metal that all aircraft have. Starting procedure. Primer, mags on, prop control full forward, mixture rich, throttle cracked about an inch. Hit the starter, and that big Pratt & Whitney coughed, sputtered, and caught with a roar that you felt in your chest. All 18 cylinders firing in sequence, that massive propeller starting to turn, the whole aircraft vibrating with contained power. 48 Thunderbolts started up that morning, the thunder of their engines rolling across the field like an artillery barrage. We taxied out in groups of 4, the big fighters waddling along on their landing gear like metal ducks heading to water. Takeoff was still the most dangerous part of every mission. That moment when you push the throttle forward and all 900 horses try to flip you onto your back. But I'd done it enough times now that my hands knew what to do before my brain gave the orders. Right rudder, stick forward slightly, let the tail come up, feel for the moment when the wings wanted to fly, and then ease back and let the Thunderbolt leap into the air. We climbed in formation, all 48 aircraft rising through the morning haze over England. At 10,000 feet, I plugged in my oxygen mask, that rubber and canvas contraption that made you sound like Darth Vader and smell your own breath for hours. Above 15,000 feet, you needed it. The air up where we operated was thin enough to kill you in minutes without supplemental oxygen. By 20,000 feet, we were above the weather, flying through crystal clear air in a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The bombers were ahead of us, boxes of B-17s in tight formation, their contrails marking the sky like chalk lines. We slid into position around them, fighters above, below, and on the flanks. A protective screen of aluminum and firepower. The Germans hit us over Le Bourget at 13:35 hours. I saw them first, black dots high and to the east, maybe 16 of them, diving down from 30,000 feet. Focke-Wulf 190S, from JG-26, the Abbeville kids, some of the best pilots the Luftwaffe had. "Bandits, high right, 4 o'clock, I called over the radio, my mouth dry despite the oxygen. "Roger, second flight, stay tight, stay high," Walker responded. "Let them commit before we engage." Easy to say when you're leading the formation. Harder when you're tail end Charlie and you can see them lining up their attack run with you right in their crosshairs. They came down like hammers from heaven. 16 Focke-Wulfs in a perfect bounce, their BMW radial engines screaming, their wings lit up with muzzle flashes from 20mm cannons and machine guns. The morning sky suddenly filled with tracers, smoke, and the sharp smell of cordite that somehow reached you even in a closed cockpit. I tried to turn into them, tried to get my nose around for a shot, but they were too fast, too coordinated, too experienced. 3 of them focused on me. Later I'd learn it was a section from 2nd Staffel, led by Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, younger brother of the famous Adolf Galland. The first burst hit me before I even knew they were that close. 20mm cannon shells exploded across my aircraft like someone hitting it with sledgehammers. The canopy shattered, spraying plexiglass through the cockpit. Hydraulic fluid erupted from somewhere behind me, coating the inside of what was left of the canopy in red liquid that looked disturbingly like blood. The engine cowling flew off, tumbling away into space, exposing the front cylinders of the Pratt and Whitney. Fire erupted behind my instrument panel, flames licking at my feet, smoke filling the cockpit, the acrid smell of burning electrical insulation mixing with hydraulic fluid and my own terror. I reached for the canopy release, ready to bail out, pulled the lever. Nothing. The canopy didn't move. I pulled harder, panic starting to override training. Still nothing. A 20mm shell had exploded in the canopy track, welding the damn thing shut. I was trapped. Another burst of cannon fire walked across my aircraft. I felt the impacts through the control stick, heard metal tearing, felt the P-47 shudder like a dying animal. Something hit my nose, shrapnel or a bullet fragment I couldn't tell, and blood poured down my face, warm and copper tasting. My left leg went numb. More shrapnel, I realized distantly, though the adrenaline kept the pain away. The Germans flashed past, rolling away to reset for another attack. In that brief moment of reprieve, I looked at my situation with the clarity that comes when you're absolutely certain you're about to die. Fire in the cockpit, canopy jammed, bleeding from multiple wounds, engine running rough, trailing smoke, alone at 27,000 feet over occupied France, 50 miles from the English Channel. The training kicked in before the panic could. Fire. Pull the emergency shutoff, cut the fuel, kill the flames. I yanked the lever and the fire died, leaving me in a smoke-filled cockpit with probably 2 minutes before I passed out from lack of oxygen. Oxygen mask. Was it damaged? No, still working, though the rubber tasted like burnt plastic now. Engine. Still running, barely, shaking like it was having a seizure but producing power. The R2800 radial could take incredible punishment. Half the cylinders could be shot out and it would keep going. Please God, let it keep going. Controls. Sluggish, but responsive. The elevator cables must be partially severed, but I had enough control to level the wings and point the nose at England. Oil was coating the windscreen now, thick black crude from the engine, mixing with hydraulic fluid and blood to create a syrupy mess that I couldn't see through. I wiped at it with my gloved hand, but that just smeared it worse. Forward visibility, 0. I'd have to navigate by looking out the sides. I trimmed the aircraft to fly straight and level, or as level as it would go with damaged controls, and pointed toward where England should be. Fuel? I had no idea. The gauges were shot to hell. Time to England? Maybe 20 minutes if the engine held together, and the Germans didn't come back. That's when I saw the Focke-Wulf. He was behind me, maybe 500 yards back, flying in formation with my crippled Thunderbolt, just sitting there, watching me, waiting. I couldn't fight, couldn't evade, couldn't bail out. All I could do was fly straight and hope. He closed to 300 yards. I could see him clearly now through my shattered canopy. A young guy, blonde hair visible under his leather flying helmet, his Focke-Wulf painted in the distinctive JG-26 colours. He was looking at me, probably trying to figure out how I was still flying. Then he opened fire. The 20mm cannon shells hit like the fist of God. I felt each impact through the aircraft structure, felt the P-47 trying to come apart around me. The tail shuddered, the wings flexed, metal screamed. I hunched down behind my armor plate, that 3/8-inch steel plate that sat behind my seat, and prayed to every deity I could remember. The burst lasted maybe 3 seconds. It felt like 3 years. When it stopped, I was still flying, still breathing, still alive, though I had no idea how. The German pulled alongside, maybe 50 feet away, close enough that I could see his face clearly. He was staring at me, and I was staring at him, 2 pilots from different worlds sharing a moment that neither of us would ever forget. His expression changed as he looked at my aircraft. Confidence shifted to confusion. Confusion to something that looked like fear. What he saw shouldn't have been possible. An aircraft so damaged it should have fallen from the sky minutes ago, still flying, still heading for England, its pilot still fighting. He fell back behind me again. I watched him in what was left of my mirrors, watched him position for another attack. The second burst was machine gun fire only. His cannons must be empty. 13mm rounds walked across my aircraft, punching holes in the wings, the fuselage, the tail. I felt them hitting, heard them impacting, waited for the one that would hit something critical and send me spinning down. It didn't come. He pulled alongside again, stared at the flying wreck that refused to die. And I saw him shake his head, just a small movement, but unmistakable. Disbelief, maybe even respect. He emptied his remaining ammunition into me. Every last round. I could hear them hitting, could see the holes appearing in my wings, could feel the aircraft shaking with each impact. And still, I flew. The Focke-Wulf pulled alongside one last time. The pilot looked at me, looked at my impossible aircraft, and did something I never expected. He gave me a salute, not a Nazi salute, just a simple pilot's gesture of respect. Then he peeled away and disappeared into the clouds, heading back toward France. I was alone. The flight back to England was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Every second I expected the engine to quit, the controls to fail, the aircraft to finally give up and fall apart. The cockpit was freezing. The shattered canopy let in -40-degree air at altitude, and I was already going into shock from blood loss and cold. I couldn't feel my hands anymore. My legs were numb. Blood kept dripping into my eyes from the head wound, and I had to keep wiping it away with numb fingers that barely worked. The engine sounded like it was tearing itself apart, vibrating so badly that the instruments were just blurs. But we flew. Somehow, impossibly, we flew. I crossed the English coast at about 15,000 feet, having gradually descended because I couldn't maintain altitude anymore. The white cliffs of Dover had never looked more beautiful. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the stick steady. I couldn't land at our home base, didn't have the control authority or the visibility. Instead, I aimed for Manston, an emergency landing field on the coast with long runways designed for damaged bombers. Got on the radio, miraculously it still worked, and croaked out that I was coming in, wounded aircraft, needed immediate landing clearance. Roger, emergency aircraft, you're cleared to land any runway. Fire trucks are rolling. Good luck. Luck. I'd used up about 10 lifetimes worth in the last hour. The landing was more controlled crash than actual landing. I couldn't see forward, could barely work the controls, and had no idea if the landing gear would hold or if the tires were even intact. I aimed by looking out the sides, lined up with the runway as best I could, chopped the power, and let the Thunderbolt fall the last few feet. We hit hard. The landing gear held. Thank God. Thank Republic Aviation. Thank the engineers who overbuilt everything. The P-47 bounced, settled, and rolled out. The engine quit about halfway down the runway, just gave up and died, all the metal having finally had enough. We coasted to a stop. Fire trucks surrounded us immediately, crews ready with foam and axes. An ambulance pulled up, medics running toward the aircraft with stretchers. I sat there in the cockpit, still strapped in, shaking too badly to even reach for the harness release. My crew chief, Moretti, who'd somehow gotten word and driven down from our base, climbed up on the wing and opened the canopy. It took him and another guy 5 minutes with crowbars and hammers to finally pry it open. The explosion had welded it that thoroughly. "Holy Mary, Mother of God," Moretti whispered when he saw me. "Lieutenant, how the hell are you alive?" I tried to answer, but couldn't make my mouth work. He and the medics got me out of the seat. I couldn't stand on my own, legs too wobbly from shock and cold and blood loss. They laid me on a stretcher, and as they carried me away, I looked back at my aircraft. What I saw didn't seem possible. The P-47 was more whole than airplane. The canopy was gone. The engine cowling was missing. The tail looked like Swiss cheese. The wings had so many holes you could practically see through them. Cannon shells had torn through the fuselage in a dozen places. The vertical stabilizer was hanging on by a few pieces of metal. Moretti would later tell me he counted over 200 bullet and shell holes before he stopped counting. The crew chiefs and maintenance guys who examined it said it shouldn't have been able to fly, that by all laws of physics and engineering it should have come apart over France, but it hadn't. The Thunderbolt had brought me home. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital recovering from shrapnel wounds and then another week on light duty before they'd clear me to fly again. The doctors wanted me grounded longer, said I'd been through trauma, needed time to process it, might have psychological issues. I told them I needed to get back in the air, that sitting on the ground thinking about it would be worse than flying, that my squadron needed me. The truth was more complicated. I was terrified. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that Focke-Wulf pulling alongside, saw those guns firing, felt those impacts. I woke up at night in cold sweats, my heart racing, convinced I could hear cannon shells exploding. But I also knew that if I didn't get back in the cockpit immediately, I never would. The fear would win, and everything I'd survived would have been for nothing. My first flight back was a simple training mission. Just me and my rebuilt P-47C, taking her up for a test flight to make sure everything worked. I was shaking when I strapped in, and Moretti noticed. "She's solid, Lieutenant," he told me, patting the fuselage like it was a favourite dog. "We rebuilt her from the tail forward. She's ready if you are." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and started the engine. The familiar rumble of the R2800 was oddly comforting. This was the sound that had brought me home, the engine that had refused to quit when everything else was falling apart. The takeoff was rough. I'd lost some of my touch in those weeks away, but once I was airborne, something changed. The fear was still there, but it was manageable, pushed into a corner by the simple reality of flying. Up here, at 5,000 feet over the English countryside, I remembered why I'd wanted to fly in the first place. The P-47 responded to my commands like we were old friends. The controls were heavy but precise, the engine powerful and reliable, the whole aircraft solid and reassuring. This wasn't some fragile machine that would disintegrate if you looked at it wrong. This was a weapon built by people who understood that in war, survival matters more than elegance. I practiced some basic maneuvers, gentle turns, climbs, descents, nothing aggressive. The aircraft did everything I asked, no problems, no glitches, no reason for the fear that kept trying to claw its way up my throat. Then I rolled, inverted and dove. Not a combat dive, not yet, just a gentle acceleration toward the fields below. But as the airspeed built, 300 miles per hour, 350, 400, I felt something click in my brain. This was what the Thunderbolt did. This was its advantage, its weapon, its purpose. The weight that made it awkward in turning fights made it unstoppable in vertical maneuvers. I pulled out at 3,000 feet, the G-forces pressing me into my seat, and pointed the nose at the sky. The P-47 climbed like it was riding an elevator, trading all that accumulated speed for altitude in seconds. Any German fighter trying to follow that maneuver would be left choking on my exhaust. I landed with a smile on my face for the first time in weeks. Moretti met me on the hard stand, grinning like he knew something. "Welcome back, Lieutenant. You looked good up there." "Thanks, Chief. She flies like a dream." "That's because she knows you're the crazy bastard who proved she could take anything and keep flying." He slapped the fuselage again. "You two belong together." He was right. The P-47 and I had bonded in blood and fire over France. We understood each other now. By August 1943, I was back on full combat duty, and the air war had changed. We'd learned to use the Thunderbolt's strengths, altitude, dive speed, and firepower, and the Germans were paying the price. The missions that had been desperate survival exercises in April had become turkey shoots by late summer. The tactics Hub Zemke had taught us were gospel now. Climb high, stay above the Germans, wait for them to commit to attacking the bombers, then dive on them from above. Use the speed to make one fast pass, guns blazing, then zoom back up to altitude before they could react. Don't get drawn into turning fights. Don't try to outclimb them at their altitude. Use the advantages we had, not the ones we wished we had. And those 8.50 caliber machine guns, Roosevelt's piano as the Germans called them, proved devastatingly effective. When you hit a German fighter with all 8 guns converging at 300 yards, it didn't just get damaged, it disintegrated. I saw a Messerschmitt 109 literally cut in half by a 2-second burst. The tail separated from the fuselage, the wings folded up, and the whole thing came apart like a model airplane hit by a hammer. The German pilots who'd laughed at us in April weren't laughing anymore. We could hear it in their radio chatter, the increasing panic, the desperation. They called us Jebos and Indian, fat targets, but the fear in their voices told a different story. I got my 3rd kill on August 17th during the Regensburg raid. A Messerschmitt 110 destroyer aircraft trying to position for a rocket attack on the B-17s. I dove from 28,000 feet, hit 600 miles per hour in the dive, and opened fire at 400 yards. The German gunner got off maybe 3 rounds before my converging fire walked into their aircraft and tore it apart. The whole front section just vanished in a cloud of aluminum fragments and fire. 4th kill came 2 days later. Focke-Wulf 190, experienced pilot, good aircraft. But he made the mistake of trying to climb away from me. The Thunderbolt with its turbocharger followed him up to 30,000 feet like he was standing still. And at that altitude, his Focke-Wulf was gasping for air while my R2800 was still producing full power. One burst from 400 yards, and he was streaming smoke and spinning down. By October, I was an ace. 5 confirmed kills, 3 probables, and more damaged aircraft than I could count. But more importantly, I was alive. In a squadron where the average life expectancy was measured in weeks, I'd survived 6 months of combat flying the aircraft everyone had said was a death trap. The Thunderbolt had proven the skeptics wrong. Its rugged construction meant it could absorb incredible punishment. Its powerful engine meant it dominated high-altitude combat. Its heavy armament meant any German fighter caught in its gun sight was doomed. And its sheer weight, initially seen as a disadvantage, made it faster in a dive than anything the Luftwaffe had. In November 1943, I got word that the German pilot who'd attacked me over Le Bourget had been identified. Intelligence had pieced together the story from various sources, German radio intercepts, combat reports, and interviews with other pilots. His name was never officially confirmed, but the evidence pointed to a pilot from 2/JG-26, possibly one of Wilhelm Ferdinand Gallen's wingmen. He'd reported encountering a crippled American fighter that absorbed his entire ammunition load and continued flying. His report had been initially dismissed as exaggeration or misidentification, but multiple German pilots had filed similar reports by late 1943. American fighters, specifically P-47s, that refused to go down despite catastrophic damage. The Luftwaffe High Command had been forced to admit that Republic Aviation had built something extraordinary, a fighter that combined firepower, performance, and survivability in ways that German engineering hadn't matched. I often wondered about that German pilot. Did he survive the war? Did he think about that encounter over France, the impossible American fighter that wouldn't die? Did he realize that in trying to kill me, he'd helped prove that the P-47 was going to win this war? By January 1944, we'd been equipped with the new P-47D-25 variant, featuring the paddle blade propeller that transformed the Thunderbolt's performance. The massive propeller improved climb rate by over 30% and gave us acceleration that matched or exceeded most German fighters. The first time I flew a paddle blade P-47, I felt like someone had installed a rocket engine. The climb rate was incredible, 3,000 feet per minute at sea level, maintaining over 2,000 feet per minute all the way to 20,000 feet. Maneuvers that had been sluggish in the earlier models were now crisp and responsive. The Germans noticed immediately. Suddenly, the fat American fighters they'd learned to avoid in a climb could stay with them, could follow them up, could catch them at any altitude. The psychological effect was significant. One of our intelligence officers told me that German pilots were reporting improved American fighters when they were actually facing the same basic aircraft with a better propeller. The sound changed too. The paddle blades created a distinctive deep thunder when the tips went supersonic, a rumbling roar that you could hear from miles away. The Germans started calling it Donnerschlag, thunderclap. Ground troops would hear that sound and dive for cover, knowing that death from above was incoming. We also received external fuel tanks that extended our range deep into Germany. The standard load was 200-plus gallon wing tanks that we'd drop when we encountered enemy fighters. Even with the tanks, the paddle blade Thunderbolt could fight effectively, something the earlier models couldn't do. I finished my combat tour in March 1944 with 27 confirmed victories, making me one of the top American aces in Europe. 27 German pilots who'd climbed into their aircraft thinking they were the hunters, not realizing they'd become prey. 27 machines destroyed by the concentrated fire of 8.50 caliber machine guns, proof that American industrial might could overwhelm tactical finesse. But the numbers don't tell the real story. The real story is survival. Of the 48 pilots who shipped out to England with me in January 1943, only 12 completed a full tour. The rest were killed, captured, or so badly wounded they never flew again. I survived because I learned to trust the Thunderbolt, to use its strengths instead of mourning its weaknesses. I survived because Republic Aviation built an aircraft tough enough to absorb punishment that would have destroyed 3 conventional fighters. I survived because Pratt & Whitney built an engine that could take cannon hits and keep running. I survived because American industry could replace every aircraft we lost while German factories struggled to maintain production. But mostly, I survived because on June 26, 1943, a 7-ton fighter aircraft refused to accept that it was dead. It kept flying when every law of physics said it should fall. It brought me home when I had no right to expect survival. It proved that sometimes brute force and rugged engineering beat elegant design. After the war, I was invited to a reunion of German and American fighter pilots in 1985, 40 years after the shooting stopped, after the smoke cleared, after the hate faded into history. I met several former Luftwaffe pilots there, men who'd been trying to kill me, and I'd been trying to kill them, now just old guys swapping stories and drinking beer. One of them, a former JG-26 pilot named Hans Hartmann, asked me about my survival in June 1943. The story had become legendary on both sides. The American pilot in the flying wreck who absorbed hundreds of rounds and flew home. We couldn't believe it, he told me, his English accented but clear. The reports came back saying an American fighter had taken everything a 190 could deliver and continued flying. Command thought it was propaganda, that we were making excuses for not killing more of you. It wasn't propaganda, I said, showing him photos of my aircraft after it landed. This is what was left. He stared at the pictures in silence for a long moment. Then he looked up at me with something like awe in his old eyes. We were so certain of our superiority, he said quietly. Our fighters were lighter, more nimble, more sophisticated. We had the best pilots, the most experience. But you had something we couldn't match. Aircraft built to survive, built to take punishment and keep fighting, built to bring their pilots home. That's what beat us in the end. Not better pilots or better tactics, better engineering. American engineering. I'm 98 years old now, writing this in 2018, 75 years after that June morning over France. Most of my squadron mates are gone. Most of the Germans we fought are gone. The world has moved on. And the great air battles of World War II are ancient history to most people. But I still remember. I remember the sound of those 8 guns firing in unison, the thunder that gave the Thunderbolt its name. I remember the feeling of that big radial engine pulling me up to altitude, reliable and powerful. I remember the sight of that Focke-Wulf pulling alongside, its pilot's face visible, his expression shifting from confidence to disbelief as he realized he couldn't kill me. Most of all, I remember what that aircraft taught me, that sometimes survival matters more than elegance, that power and toughness can overcome sophistication, and that the best weapon is the one that brings you home. The Republic P-47. Thunderbolt was never the most graceful aircraft. It wasn't the fastest or the most maneuverable, but it was the toughest. And in war, tough beats pretty every single time. That German pilot who emptied his ammunition into me and then saluted before flying away understood it. The Luftwaffe pilots who called our guns Roosevelt's piano understood it. Every German pilot who watched a Thunderbolt absorb punishment that should have destroyed it and then return home understood it. We didn't beat them through superior tactics or better training or more skilled pilots. We beat them because American industry built 15,000 aircraft that could take everything the Luftwaffe could deliver and keep fighting. We beat them because farm boys from Oklahoma and factory workers from Brooklyn built machines that refused to quit. The sky over Europe had been contested in 1943. By 1945, it belonged to America. And the thunder of those Pratt & Whitney radials, the hammer of those Browning machine guns, the sight of those fat, ugly, beautiful Thunderbolts climbing to altitude, that's what won it. I sometimes wonder if that German pilot survived the war, if he's still alive somewhere, an old man like me with memories of days when we tried to kill each other at 27,000 feet. If I could talk to him now, I'd thank him. Not for trying to kill me, though in a strange way that too, but for showing me what I was flying, what had been built to protect me, what had refused to let me die. The P-47 Thunderbolt saved my life, and in saving mine, it saved thousands of others. That's its real legacy, not the aircraft destroyed or the missions flown or the victories won, but the pilots who came home because they flew a machine built by people who understood that in war, bringing your people home is the only victory that truly matters. The thunder has been silent for 75 years now. The great engines are quiet. The guns are cold. The propellers have stopped turning. But I can still hear it sometimes, in my memory, in my dreams. That distinctive roar of 18 cylinders producing 2,000 horses of pure American power, pulling a 7-ton fighter into the sky to do battle with the best the Luftwaffe had. And I can still hear those guns. Roosevelt's piano, the Germans called them. The sound of thunder, the sound of America, the sound that meant you were still alive and fighting and going home. That's what I remember most. Not the fear or the death or the destruction, but the sound that meant survival. The thunder that brought me home.